Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Michael Albrecht. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's a very warm day in South Florida.
Yes, I bet it is. I mean, it's very much the heat of the summer. I guess that's we're recording this in early August. So you wrote the book, Trumping the Media. Have done a lot of analysis as a communication scholar, talking about trying to understand political discourse, including particularly some of the stuff going on with Donald Trump. And I guess this is the kind of the key question of going on right now is what the heck is going on. Maybe I guess this is starting at a bit of a high level, but we're what 6 or 7 months, so many months into the second Trump presidency. What are your thoughts as somebody who studies these things?
Well, if one of the things that I see is different between the first time and the second time, and I'm not the first person to say this or anything, is that the first time Trump had all these things he really wanted to do, but wasn't exactly sure how to execute them. And so he would often put out some big ideas and it would come to nothing, or he'd fire people sort of willy-nilly because they weren't doing what he wanted to do, but he didn't know how to manipulate the levers of power in the same way he does this time. This time, he seems to have a plan that Project 2025 that he assured us during the last election had nothing to do with is pretty much the game plan for what he's doing. So you can sort of see, he's not firing his staff willy-nilly. He has the same people. He hired all loyalists. And he's really going after these centers of power. What he really wants to do is he really wants to gut the government. And he's not new in doing this. Putin is probably the one who did it the most. But Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary, and others have taken this model, and it's sort of an usually when we think of authoritative leaderships, we think of Hannah Arendt, and she coined the term totalitarianism, which are these governments where the government is part of your everyday life. So fascism and Stalinism were the two she was grappling with at the time. But this form of authoritarianism is a little bit different in that it's trying to make government so small that that you can't trust it to do anything. You can't rely upon it for health. So he's got someone who's trying to dismantle health. You can't rely upon it for weather. So he's trying to get someone to dismantle weather. You can't rely upon it for any of these various things. That it's sort of the opposite direction, where in Stalin's Russia, the government would tell you all of those things. This is your health. This is what you should eat. These are the jobs you should have. This is the weather. And this is sort of the opposite of, well, if nobody really knows what's going on and there's no truth, then the government can sort of make all of these kind of shady deals. So that's, I think, what's going on. I don't think he wants to get people. There's part of him that loves the pomp and the circumstance of Hitler and Mussolini and those kind of figures. But I don't think he has a country that's ready for that. So I think he prefers or he's taken to the fact, well, I can have all this power and I can accumulate wealth by doing these other things that are dismantling the government. And that's what Putin did. Some people think Putin is the richest person in the world. It's hard to gauge that because he doesn't keep real, the books aren't open. But people think that Putin has used his authoritarian nature and it's been 25 years since he's come to power, to accumulate vast amounts of wealth. A lot of it is hidden, and in part because he doesn't government money goes to Putin. It doesn't go to things you usually associate government with. Mm-hmm. So that goes in lots of directions, but I don't know. If you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this makes total sense. This reminds me, I previously interviewed another scholar by the name of Benjamin Studebaker, and he has this idea he kind of has two forms of totalitarianism that are two ends of the spectrum, and maybe they actually kind of coincide in the extremes, but he has maybe authoritarianism and like a rule-based totalitarianism. So rule-based totalitarianism is like the process dictates everything. you can't do anything except through the process, and the process is what rules our lives. And then you have something like authoritarianism, which is basically all power is vested in that one person. Maybe you have a personality cult kind of idea, and what that person says goes. It seems like from what that this is what I was thinking about with what you were saying. It seems like Trump is much more on that side of authoritarianism, and I guess one tension I've had with Donald Trump is to what extent he's trying to accrue power. Is he trying to accrue power to like take over, or to what extent is he trying to accrue power just for personal ends, or to what extent is he just trying to like you said, to enrich himself, or to what extent is he just accruing power and there isn't really a goal and it just kind of is, you know what I mean? Like I guess I'm somewhere in the second two as the most dominant, but I think there's a bit of all three. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be if Trump had a little bit more of a specific ideology, then I think it would be easier to make those decisions of this is what he's trying to do. Hitler and Stalin both had a large plan of like, this is what we want to do. This is like the cult of personality was a means to getting those ends. For Trump, his cult of personality is like, well, that's really what he wants. He wants to be the most adored person in history. He wants to be on Mount Rushmore. He wants to be on the $100 bill. He wants to be named the Kennedy Center after. And he sees that people have been named, like we named that after Kennedy. So Kennedy must have been great. So he says, well, what if I just change it to my name? And Stalin did that, but I think Stalin did that towards a larger aim that he thought that this is the way the world should work. Where Trump just says, I don't think he has an idea of how the world should work. His ideology basically boils down to, I think tariffs are good. I don't like windmills, and I'm the smartest person in the room. Like that's sort of anything else beyond that seems to be, and I should be able to go after anyone who has slighted me at any point in the past. I just realized that someone was posting about Pritzker, the guy who's the governor of Illinois right now, who's going to make the news, and I imagine he's running for president. But Trump has a feud with him going back to the 70s and 80s because they were both in the building of hotels business. And so if anyone, like, this is why he brought up Rosie O'Donnell, who hasn't been in the news in 25 years, but like he's still mad at her because she said something 20 years ago, and he has to revenge those slights. That's not really a healthy way to run a country. And it can put someone with an idea who had a strong ideology in some difficult situations, but he doesn't have that. Just going back to something you said, I really like the idea of thinking about this as process versus result. Trump does not care for the process. Like he doesn't. He has no. He doesn't. That's not really what concerns him. He just wants to get something done. Apparently, that's how he ran his businesses. Well, I'm just going to find a way of getting something done. But if you think about Hitler had we had the Hitler Youth. So our process is we're going to take these kids and we're going to turn them into true believers, right? And anybody else we're going to move to a different place. And it was a whole from cradle to grave kind of, this is how you're going to become a Nazi. Whereas Trump does not have that kind of process. He doesn't have time for that kind of process. He's never thought through these things in a smart way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this makes total sense. And one thing it does seem like Trump does care about, and you talk quite a bit about this in your book, which was about the first Trump presidency. This one hadn't happened yet when you published it. But it seems like, and you were hinting at this, Trump cares about his image. Trump cares about how he's portrayed. And he does, like, you talk about in the book how he revamps communication, and how he kind of creates this environment for his followers who just kind of listen to everything he says, and maybe even uses himself as a villain with those of us who are maybe a bit more in touch with reality to kind of prop himself up as in this communication chamber. Can maybe because what you said, Trump seems to mostly care about himself. How in your experience, when you were looking into it, how has he done this in his first term? And then maybe we can come to the second term and talk about how that's similar or different.
Cool. Well, this is a little bit easier for me to talk about because this is where I did the majority of my research. So thanks for circling back, as they say. One thing I think Trump is that I say in my book a lot, that Trump was really good at, smart might not be the word, but it's sort of, he's very intuitive, and he very much intuits how new technologies are being used. So I have a chapter that's all about FM talk radio, mostly on the conservative side of things, but also Howard Stern, who's, I don't know where he is political. He did run for president as a libertarian, so maybe that's his view. But Trump did hours and hours and hours on the Howard Stern show, and he did all of these call-ins to various Fox News shows, and so he figured out how to use that medium of that Rush Limbaugh is sort of the king of, and sort of like, oh, I can do that. I can do that in a different kind of way. I can bully people. I can talk down to people. I can do it in a way that people say, oh, they're just kidding. It's just fun. Like, we're just having a laugh. And the scary part of that is if you ever criticize them, they're to say, wait a minute, you can't take a joke. And so Trump was able to do that. And that's just one example. And I talk about how he used Twitter and he was a very early adopter of Twitter, and was on Twitter until they said he couldn't do it anymore. This was before Musk had taken over Twitter. He was banned from the site, and for his white nationalist impulses. One of the reasons I'm no longer on Twitter, I know a lot of people aren't on Twitter these days, is because it has become, once Musk came back and let the white nationalists back on, it's hard to avoid. And for someone like me, like, I'd love to have various points of views. I actually very much like reading right-wing takes on things. I watch more Fox News than I should. But once it sort of starts veering into like, oh, this is actual Nazi propaganda, I don't need that coming into my feed all over the place. Some people have more of a stomach and have written some great books on that. But I was just like, I got to get off of this. But in my book, I talk about basically, so I talk about how he did talk radio. I talk about television. I talk about the Twitter, and reality television was a new way of examining television. And of course, Trump was very good at that, because he had his show for over a decade and came to see like, oh, it doesn't really make a difference what the plot is about. What makes a difference is having conflict, having winners and losers, having people who are cool characters, interesting characters that you want to have back. And it's one of the reasons that he's stocked his cabinet this time with people who are from Fox News. They're just reality show. Literally, Sean Casey, I think that's his name, maybe I'm getting it wrong, was on The Real World. He's the guy who's the transportation secretary. If I have his last name wrong, his name is Sean, but I can't remember his last name. But I want to say Casey. Anyway, he was literally from the world of reality TV. He also took people who were literally from Fox News, and that's sort of he really enjoys that style of interaction. Fox News was able to take news and make it more entertaining. Whether or not you agree with it or disagree with it, you know, there's bells, there's whistles, there's people shouting at each other. It's hard to not watch it. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, what if we did that and made it like a presidency? And so there's a really good article out there, if you want a good one, about how he looked at P.T. Barnum and said, aha, that's the guy. Like, most people see P.T. Barnum and they're like, oh, that guy's a huckster. But Trump's like, that guy's is what America is, and I want to try and embody that. The show is the thing that's the most important. And going back to the first question, if in his first administration he was all show with very little substance, this time he sort of figured out the substance and the show and how they work together. Anyways, that went in several different directions, but I don't know if you have anything on that.
Yeah, well, everything you're saying makes total sense. One quick side before I go into the heat of what you're saying. There are times with I'm going to say political communication scholars like you. I don't always envy. I sometimes look at you guys' work and I'm like, Oh, I bet their social media feed is just really messed up. Because you guys have to put your pulse in. You like you're talking about watching a lot of Fox News. You probably have to watch a lot of very questionable content to understand it, to understand what's going on. Maybe even go to parts of the web that are even worse than Fox News. And in some ways, I feel like you guys get the messed up feed, so we don't have to. So we can listen to you guys and not have to explore it in depth to understand it ourselves. But yeah, so I guess everything you're saying makes total sense. I mean, Donald Trump does seem like penultimate, like a penultimate reality star president, and it seems like he has all media is good media, all attention is good attention, and with PT Barnum, I mean, PT Barnum was a quintessential hustler, and one thing that I think kind of puzzles me, and you do seem to have more of a pulse on this, so this is why I'm asking is why is this successful? Why do you think like he routinely tells lies, but is still able to have like a cult following? And it seems like not just even in spite of his lies, but almost because of that. Like, yeah, why do you think this works?
That's a really interesting question. Just as an aside, to go back to the first thing you mentioned, I do have the research can get a little rough if you're talking about some of these things, and I chose the easy way out. I have a chapter that's on 4chan and 8chan and all of the different things, and that's where a lot of the sort of darker part of the web was percolating in the Obama administration and the early Trump administration, and I relied almost exclusively on secondhand. Other people had gone to I didn't actually go to 4chan very much, which probably saved my sanity a little. I just read what other scholars had done and said, well, it seemed like they did a really good job. I'm just going to do a meta-analysis. So that's one way of avoiding that. But someone has to do that work, and I'm really grateful for the people who are doing that. And there's some great scholars that are working on the manosphere and who are working on all of those things. But the question of why it's successful, I think one way is to look historically. Is people ask why Hitler was able to gain power, and Hitler was able to gain power not because he had a majority of the people like him. Trump has still never quite had a majority, although that's with only about 60% of people voting, it's hard to tell if he has a majority or not. But I think Hitler had something like 30-something% of the vote and was able to take power, in part because the people he was fighting didn't have any spine. Mm-hmm. And so if you put Trump up against marginal politicians who are just reading DNC talking points, or your Chuck Schumers of the world, who don't have strong personalities, who are mostly interested in preserving their own political future. Those types of people, he walks over. If you remember in the Republican debates in 2016, you had all of these professional politicians, Rubio, Scott Walker, all of these people who had run big states and were seen as like, oh, these are the people. Jeb Bush was in that one. And they're like, oh, and he's destroyed them because they wanted to keep on their talking points. And they had this, they couldn't see that something new was going on. Mm-hmm. So there are some Dems right now who are starting to see it. I think I just said Pritzker, but AOC is, of course, someone who's always willing to go after him. And you can see these moments, like there was a moment last summer when Tim Walz was actually calling Republicans and MAGA folks weird, and it was getting some traction. And then you could watch as the Democratic establishment said, well, we don't want that. We want you to talk about kitchen table issues. And so you have the Carvels of the world, and those people come in and sort of are constantly getting these other candidates to act like puppets. And it seems to me there is a hunger on the part of the people for someone who has a little bit more authenticity, which is a very different thing than telling the truth. You can be very authentic and lie. just historically a great figure of this is Bob Dylan. People often see Bob Dylan as like the quintessential marker of authenticity. But if you go back and you watch any of his old, especially in the 60s and 70s, his interviews, he was always lying. He was saying, he said he was riding rails. I can put those two words together. He was doing that before he was a musician, and he never talked about his family in Minnesota, and he was always sort of concocting these things. And his autobiography is actually sort of literally plagiarized from other people who have written stories about him. So it's not really coming from him. But yet people still loved and fawned over. So people don't care that Trump is telling the truth. I mean, I sort of do. But most people, I don't think, but they care that he's being authentic. Whatever that means, I think he's authentically kind of crass and unlikable. But for a lot of people, they like that. They like the sort of tough guy persona that he has. So those are some of the reasons. I think we're also, I think, a little bit less attached to truth than we might once have been. People who study reality television talk about the fact that at the beginning, people were like, why would you want to watch this? It's obviously staged. And now reality TV has been on TV for 25 years. And of course we want to watch it. We want to watch it because it's staged. It is good theater. It's fun. I enjoy watching, what was the one I was just watching? I was just watching one of them. And I'm like, oh, this is just great fun. I like Temptation Island. It's my favorite. But others can do what they want. And it's because these people are interacting in a way that makes it seem like, oh, they're interesting, cool. And I hate to say that Trump is interesting and cool, but I do know that lots of people find him that way. And so if you try to attack him by just fact checking, as Democrats sometimes tend to do, you're not going to get anywhere because the actual underlying truth doesn't really matter, I think.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, what I know this might be a hard question to answer, but what do you think authenticity means in this context? It seems like maybe kind of spitballing an initial idea that authenticity has to do with a cohesive narrative, where the narrative at least feels like it checks with reality, that the narrative says something useful about the world in which we live. Like that's something about that is what authenticity. I mean, that might be what Bob Dylan's stories about himself, even if they were factually wrong, they still told a story about that was cohesive, that said something about what it meant to be about U.S. society at that time, right? Or what do you think authenticity is?
I don't know if you Google scholared me, but if you were, you would realize my dissertation is written on authenticity. So Perfect. That's put me right in a direction that I've thought a lot about. And when you were explaining it, you said authenticity is a feeling, and I think that's rather than a fact. So if you think of things as being either rational or irrational, authenticity is often a very irrational thing. So even though someone might not be authentic, they can feel very authentic. So I point to someone like Dylan as being an example of that, or someone like Springsteen, who is like, all right, I have spent all of these years of my life. He himself never worked a working class job. He himself didn't work in the factory and get fired and all of the things we associate Bruce Springsteen with, but he was able to, as you astutely said, turn that into a cohesive narrative. Like, oh, here's a guy who's going to sing for those people in a way that's going to make them say, like, yeah, you're talking about me. And it's not just that you're talking about me, you're doing it in a way that makes you feel like you very plausibly could be talking about me, right? You could be putting on blue jeans and a red work hat and throwing a baseball in a backyard like he was doing on the cover of Born in the USA. Like, that's, even if he wasn't actually doing those things, the fact that we're like, oh, we can, the narrative is cohesive, and that makes songs when he sings about those things. When he sings Born in the USA, which is about someone who loses their job at the factory and goes to war and all those things, that he's like, oh, I get it, I feel this. And so authenticity is you're constantly working to construct it. But this idea that people have a front stage and a backstage, the and for example, if when I was applying for professor jobs when I was younger, I was pretty young when I first started. I was in my young 30s, and so I wanted to make sure that I seemed like a professor. So I would go into the interview with a corduroy jacket with patches on the sleeve, so that I could oh well, even though this is a young guy, but like he's got a beard, he's got patches on his sleeve. He's a professor. He's acting like a professor. He's filling that role, and it makes you feel like, oh, he could very well teach a class. There's all kinds of problematic things about that involve gender and race and a whole bunch of other things that's beyond the topic of this. But that if you can get people to feel like oh, that's you are the thing, and Trump sort of does that in terms of like, oh, I'm a straight shooting. I'm one of you, and this is the trick, and I don't know if I can quite do this, explain why, but I'll give it a shot. The trick that Trump does is he, who is a multimillionaire, if not a billionaire, his base tend to be people who are not the poorest of society, but that are working class, right? That people have jobs who are like just above the sort of people who might need to be on social safety nets. And if in answer to why I think it's this, is I think that he has this grudge of he did not grow up in Manhattan. He wanted to be one of the big Manhattan bigwigs. He wanted to be like all these other people who were building the tallest buildings in the world and who were controlling them. And he was just outsider guy from an outer borough with kind of a thick accent. So he was never able to, like, people had their fancy art in their apartments and he had his gilded in gold. Like his stuff is so tacky by the New York elite would say like, oh my God, everything is gold and ugly. And the fact that he always said they're looking down at me. So he takes the people who are saying, oh, you know who's looking down at you? The liberal elite. These liberals, they want to, they want to teach their kids whatever they want to. They want to take religion out of the schools. They want to force these social issues down your neck. And Trump is able to say, you know what, for years I had to crawl my way in this society. He's still a billionaire. He still has wants for nothing, but he's able to have that everyone's dumping on me. And he plays that up. That went in a lot of directions, but I think it made a little sense.
Yeah, this makes absolute sense. I think this is very helpful. It seems like one thing that this makes me think about is how much the current time period, maybe U.S. society in general, maybe this is just on the right, but this is a time of anger. So you said at the very beginning, you talked about how vindictive Donald Trump can be. You know, he has this grudge against Rosie O'Donnell for decades, but like what he's in effect doing is channeling that type of anger aspect of his personality to match the feeling that people have, which is of anger. It's a very but like in a different era. So like, you know, you do talk about this in the book. You talk about Ronald Reagan, but like he's a different era that also probably did something similar. He channeled his energy to make himself fit a certain persona. That's the word I'm often used to using for this kind of idea. But it was a very different persona with a very different feeling. It was a much more, calming and we're going to be great. It was very much not anger because it was a very different era. And so I think that's one thing I was actually, that this made me think about. This is a time of anger that even allowed Donald Trump in particular to rise up based off of these feelings, because otherwise it wouldn't have been able to take root in the way that it did.